over these past 22 months, when we have had all of our routines turned upside down because of this pandemic, so many things uncovered that perhaps were always there, but now are in standing before us in stark reality. So many questions that beg to be answered. And one of the questions, and I'm sure that you have seen lots of this in the news and on the internet and Facebook and so forth. And as a clergy person, my inbox has been inundated with this stuff in the last several months. And that is how we open our churches, when we open our churches, what the church is going to look like as we open it. Will the church still be around once the pandemic is over? All of these questions. And it's not that people of faith have not asked these questions in the past, but like I said, the pandemic has forced us to look at these questions in more detail than perhaps we would have liked to. And so there are always, of course, the doomsayers who say that, well, this is it. This is the end. Christianity, we're living in a post-Christian era. Christianity has come to an end. It's been replaced, or it's irrelevant, or so on and so forth. And yet, when you think about it, the Christian church, and for that matter, most faith traditions, have been around for over 2,000 years. They've gone through incredible changes and difficulties, and yet somehow they emerge, often different, often changed, usually changed, and yet there is something that keeps faith communities going. And I have no doubt that faith communities will keep on going, regardless of what pandemic, regardless of what difficulty, regardless of what happens in the world, because faith communities at their very best address the inner core of our being, the inner spiritual nature of who we are. And that brings me to the first point that I want to make today. And that is, when we talk about spirituality and when we talk about religion, it's a question that I've been confronted with many, many times over the years, particularly when I've worked with people who are on the margins or who are struggling in a particular way. And they've often said to me, you know, what's the difference between religion and spirituality? Are they the same thing? Well, when I was first confronted with this a number of years ago, of course, I had to do a little bit of research and a lot of soul searching myself. And more recently, when I was working on my doctoral dissertation, this figured largely in what I was doing, because I was looking at the spiritual lives of older women at risk of becoming homeless. And so I've done a lot of reading and research and so forth, because so many people are really quick to say, well, you know, I'm a very spiritual person, but I don't go near religion. You understand, Kathy, don't you? And sometimes I want to say, well, of course I understand, and I do. And other times I want to say, as a mentor of mine said, well, I really don't. Tell me about it. So today I just want to talk a little bit about how I and others see this difference between spirituality and religion, and talk about how they're connected. Spirituality really refers to that inner sense, that sense of, as they say, what takes your breath away, what inspires a sense of awe or stops you, just stops you right where you are. And when we've talked about this in the past, I know that many of you have told me that you find this sense in nature, in things in the natural world that are so beautiful that they really take your breath away. I had an experience of that out at the church, actually, a few weeks ago, before we had stopped doing in-person services. And I was just pausing. I was the last person in the parking lot. And I was just sitting in my car for a minute. You know, I was just sort of collecting your thoughts. And then I saw a bit of movement. And from around behind the back of the church was a deer. And he just took his time walking across that that small strip of grass at the back of the church, into the woods. It was just about dark. And I watched him, totally mesmerized. There was nothing else that I was thinking about. And I realized that God had sent that this was God speaking to me and taking me out of my own thoughts and just reminding me how beautiful nature is and how much God is in everything that we do. And so for some people, those times of awe, those times of wonderment, those times when you really feel connected to something beyond, we often refer to as spirituality. Those ways that we nurture ourselves. The Methodists who came before us referred to it as piety. And that was looking after sort of your personal relationship with God, with Jesus Christ, looking after your personal spiritual sense. And religion is more about the collective. It's more about people gathering together and celebrating many of those things, and perhaps other things. And you know that when we get together at the church, we celebrate our faith, we celebrate one another's anniversaries, we celebrate one another's grief, and walk that journey with one another. Really, the best definition that I've ever been able to find, I found in a book, an article written by a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Shapiro. And I'm going to quote him when he talks about the difference between religion and spirituality. And this is what Rabbi Shapiro has to say. Religion is about belonging, community, shared values, shared rituals, and mutual support. Spirituality is about living life without a net, forever surrendered to reality, and meeting each moment with curiosity, wonder, gratitude, justice, humility, and love. The two are not opposite. Religion is often a container in which spiritual practices are preserved and passed on. Some people find the container as helpful as what it contains and choose to belong to a specific religion. Others simply take what they need from the containers and fashion their own way. Then he goes on to say, I like to do a bit of both. And I would confer with Rabbi Shapiro that often it's that container, isn't it, that we're longing for, that sense of belonging, that sense of the shared rituals, the shared disciplines. And other times, we don't want any part of that. We want sort of to be able to have those walks in nature, or compose a piece of music, or write a poem, take a photograph. Those ways that we are able to feel that sense of otherness, that sense of awe, that sense of wonderment. And so I think that in this climate that we're in right now, it's important that we have some kind of an understanding of both of these aspects of our faith. Because really, like I said, some people will say to me, oh, well, Kathy, I'm spiritual, but not religious. I understand that. Because there was a time in my life when I would describe myself that way. And the reason that I would is because I had been so badly hurt by the church. And this is when I was a teenager, when my father died, and the church wasn't there for us. And the church was worse than absent, just really unhelpful, really quite mean. And at a time when I was so vulnerable and so broken, my whole life had shattered and I didn't know kind of where to go. I was trying to find God, but I couldn't understand God. And I needed somebody to help me through all of that. And the church that I turned to just wasn't there. They just turned its back. And so I turned my back on the church for many, many years. I was angry and I was hurt and I was fed up. And I just said, you know what? if this is what Christians do, I don't really want any part of this. And then I had the opportunity to work at a church camp. I was a cook. And in that Christian community, I found exactly what I had been needing so many years ago. I found that sense of mutual support and community and shared values and shared rituals. And I knew that God hadn't left me. I had chosen not to be bothered with God, but God was still in my life. And so were the people that surrounded me in that Christian community. And that brought me back to church and brought me back into realizing that, yes, oftentimes, and I've discovered this, oftentimes when people say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious, I don't go anywhere near it. I often wonder if they, like myself, had been so badly hurt or so badly disillusioned at some point with an organized church or religion that they've stepped away from it. As we go forward, as Rabbi Shapiro says, it's important that we have both. It's important that we as a Christian community show people that we are both spiritual and religious, and that the two things can and in fact do reside together. That while we enjoy the container that our faith is in, that container being our community of faith, our shared meals, our shared communion experiences, our efforts to reach out and help others, like we did with the coats before Christmas. I know Leanna Hess spearheaded a wonderful initiative to collect coats, provide them to people downtown on the streets that were in need. Same thing with the caring cupboard, that we were able to collect donations of food to go to the caring cupboard in Mount Bridges. And those are things that we can do as a community of faith. Those aren't generally things we do as as one person, because we need the whole community to reach out. We need each other when we embark on these initiatives. We also need to nurture our own spiritual lives. And I know that I've quoted a former moderator, the very Reverend Bruce MacLeod, many times when I've said that Bruce talked about the two wings on the bird and how piety or our own spirituality is one wing and outreach to others is the other wing. And the bird has to have both to fly. We need to have both spirituality, that is our own piety, as well as outreach to others, as well as taking those values that we hold so dear, those values that Jesus taught us, of turning the other cheek, of helping the one that nobody else will help, of welcoming the stranger and feeding the sick, feeding the hungry and visiting the sick and ministering to those who have nothing. And so during this time that we're in now, during this time of lockdown, we're not able to gather as a community. It doesn't mean that we're not still collected. It doesn't mean we're not still connected as this community. But maybe right now, all of us can take these next few weeks to really focus on our own spirituality and to make sure that we're keeping our own spirits well nourished. Because we're dealing with our own spiritual life and keeping our spiritual life strong is not something that's selfish or unchristian or anything. It's kind of like self-care. Lots of people say to us, self-care is not selfish. We have to look after our own being if we're going to be able to help anybody else. It takes some of us a bit longer to realize that, but and paying attention to our own spiritual life and our own personal piety is like our spiritual self-care. If we don't attend to it and feed our own spiritual life, then we don't have much to offer when we're called as a community to reach out to others and to be the hands and feet of Christ that I've talked about many times. So while we're in this period of isolation, and I'm getting tired of it, just like you, I sometimes feel like I'm going to climb up the side of the wall here. But while we're in that time when we're not gathering with people outside our household, we're not gathering with our community of faith, maybe we can practice some of those spiritual practices, contemplative prayer or centering prayer, as some people call it. Maybe reading some of the scriptural stories, or just reading some stories or books that are inspirational, that give us a sense of the goodness of human beings. We hear so much about the opposite side of human beings from the news, but to read some of those good news stories, some of those stories that show us what the human spirit is all about. And when we see that, we see God working in every one of us. And then we know for sure that God is here. God is not abandoning us. And we will continue in the face of this pandemic or whatever other difficulty comes our way. We will continue as God's people. Thanks be to God. Amen. Would you please join me in a moment of prayer? Gracious God, on a clear winter day, we look outside and it almost looks perfect. The trees have shed their leaves, ready to live through a long winter. The sun comes brightly down. You see people, children outside, crying, and hear their laughter. And we have a sense that all is well. Then perhaps we turn on the news or pick up a newspaper or magazine, and we start to get very depressed and very down that what is going on in the world? Somehow this image of perfection is shattered every time we put on a screen. So God, help us to go outside. Help us to look at the face of those we share our living quarters with, spouses, children, grandchildren, partners, friends, and to really look at them and to see your face. For indeed, you are the face in each one of us. And we want to be the face of Christ to each and every person that we meet. So help us to do that every day in ways that perhaps we haven't in the past. And keep showing yourselves to us, O God, in those quiet moments, those moments when we feel as if we just can't stand another minute of this. Remind us that we can, and we are. And not just standing it, but learning and growing. This is not time that's wasted or useless or dead, but time when perhaps you are working within us and within our spirits, and we are becoming changed people. And may we allow ourselves to be molded in your hands the way that the potter molds clay within their hands. For when we are with you and following your will and your lead, all is well. But it is when we decide that we should be in charge and that we have plans that things go awry. We know that the best way to make you laugh is to tell you our plans. So help us simply to laugh at ourselves while we hear and listen for your plans for us and for our community. God, our hearts are heavy today because we have lost one of our dear friends, a very faithful servant in Joyce. And we miss her. We know that she is with you and she is reunited with her beloved Charlie. But we miss her here. And so we ask you, God, to be with the Scott family, with Dave and with all of his children. And we ask, and his wife, Kathy. And we ask you, God, to be with others in our community that we know are struggling, those who are grieving, those who are facing difficulties, and those who are perhaps waiting and wondering about medical treatment. The hospitals are so different right now that it's almost frightening even to walk in the door. And so we especially ask that you would wrap your arms around Bill as he seeks wholeness, and wrap that bubble around him and around Helen and Blaine as well as they support him in this journey. And keep Judy close to you, O God, as she navigates the journey that she is on. We ask you to continue, O God, to be with Brenda and Nikki, to hold Michael in your hands and bring him wholeness. And all of those people that perhaps are on our hearts, we take a moment of silence, O God, to lift those people up to you. God, our children are going back to school on Monday. And many of us are worried for them and for their teachers and the people that keep their schools safe and places of learning. And so we especially ask you to be with our children and our teachers, and to help them to be the best they can, and to bring forth from this time learning that may not be in a textbook or on a whiteboard, but learning that comes through their hearts, through living through this difficult time. We ask you, O God, to help each one of us from falling into complacency and indifference, to help us from falling into cynicism, for that is so tempting when we are isolated, when we are alone. And so in those times when we feel that we're falling into indifference or complacency, help us to remember the life of Jesus. For there were many times when he too felt these things, yet he was faithful to you and to the people around him all of his life. And may we follow his example as we repeat his prayer together, saying, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. I wish you all a good week this week. Keep well, keep safe, and know that I am here. And if you need just to chat, know that I'm here and always willing to listen. God bless you, and God bless your week ahead. Amen.